In 1967, a small British engineering company built a racing engine in a workshop in Northampton for £100,000. That engine went on to win 155 Formula One Grand Prix races across 16 years, humiliating Ferrari and every other manufacturer on the grid. It powered 12 Drivers' World Championships and 10 Constructors' titles. It turned backyard teams into Grand Prix winners. And then it outlived the greatest driver who ever sat behind it. This is the story of the Lotus 49 and the Cosworth DFV, the engine that changed motorsport forever. Number 10. The crisis that started everything. In 1965, the governing body of Formula One announced a rule change that threw the entire sport into chaos. Engine capacity was being doubled from 1.5 litres to 3 litres, effective from the start of 1966. Every team on the grid suddenly needed a completely new power unit. Ferrari dusted off old 12-cylinder designs from the 1950s. BRM decided to stack 2 of its existing V8 engines on top of each other and create a monstrous H16 that was overweight, unreliable, and so complicated that the mechanics dreaded working on it. Harry Westlake was building a V12 for Dan Gurney's Eagles. Maserati was wheeling out yet another 12-cylinder. Everyone had a plan. Everyone except Lotus. Colin Chapman, the founder of Team Lotus and one of the most brilliant designers in the history of the sport, had relied for years on engines built by Coventry Climax. When the rule change came, Coventry Climax looked at the development costs and simply walked away. They were done with racing. Chapman was left standing without an engine supplier and without the money to build one himself. He tried the government. They said no. He tried Ford in Detroit. They said no. He tried David Brown at Aston Martin. Another no. But Chapman knew 2 former Lotus employees who had started their own company in a small workshop in Northampton. Their names were Mike Costin and Keith Duckworth. They called their business Cosworth, a name made from pieces of their own surnames. And Duckworth told Chapman something that changed the course of racing history. He said he could build a competitive 3-litre Formula One engine. He just needed £100,000 to do it. Number 9. The deal that made it happen. Chapman had already been turned down by Ford once. A direct approach to the American manufacturer had gone nowhere. So he tried a different door. He reached out to Walter Hayes, the head of public affairs at Ford of Britain, a former journalist who had worked with Chapman before on the Lotus Cortina road car project. Hayes saw what Detroit had missed. He saw a chance to put the Ford name on a world championship winning car for a fraction of what it would cost to build one from scratch. He arranged a dinner with Harley Kopp, a British-based American engineer at Ford who had helped the company break into NASCAR in the 50s. Together, Hayes and Kopp put together a business case and walked it through Ford's UK chairman Stanley Gillen and all the way up to the Detroit head office. The plan had 2 stages. Stage 1, build a 4-cylinder twin-cam engine for Formula 2 racing using a production Ford cylinder block. Stage 2, use the lessons from that engine to develop a completely new V8 for Formula 1, ready by May 1967. The total cost to Ford for both engines was £100,000. By the end of 1965, the deal was signed. Ford had just bought its way into Formula One for less than the price of a single celebrity endorsement deal. They just did not know it yet. Number 8. The engine that became the car. Keith Duckworth was not the kind of engineer who followed convention. He was a first principles thinker, the sort of person who questioned every assumption before putting pen to paper. And the engine he designed broke almost every rule in the Formula One handbook. The Cosworth DFV, which stood for double 4 valve, was a 90-degree V8 displacing 2,993 cubic centimeters, 4 valves per cylinder, fuel injection, and a flat plane crankshaft. On its first dyno run, it produced 408 brake horsepower at 9,000 revolutions per minute. That alone made it competitive with anything else on the grid. But the real breakthrough was not the power figure. It was what Colin Chapman did with the engine once he got his hands on it. Chapman had his designer Maurice Philippe build the new Lotus 49 chassis so that the DFV bolted directly to the back of the monocoque tub. The engine was not just a power source, it was a structural member of the car itself. The rear suspension, the gearbox, the entire back end of the machine hung off the engine block. There was no heavy subframe, no unnecessary structure, just the monocoque, the engine, the gearbox, and the wheels. This made the Lotus 49 lighter and stiffer than anything else on the track. The basic idea of using the engine as a load-bearing part of the car had been tried before, but the Lotus 49 was the car that proved how well it could work and turned it into the template everyone else would follow. Today, every modern Formula One car uses its engine as a stressed structural element. The Lotus 49 is where that philosophy truly took hold. Number 7. The debut that nobody expected. The 4th of June 1967. Zandvoort, the Netherlands, the Dutch Grand Prix. The Lotus 49 had barely been tested. The DFV engine had spent more time on the dyno than it had on a racetrack. Nobody outside the Lotus garage knew whether the thing would survive a full Grand Prix distance. Graham Hill, the team's experienced veteran, was in one car. Jim Clark, widely considered the fastest driver alive, was in the other. Ford had specifically requested Hill be in the team. They wanted a proven world champion as insurance in case anything went wrong. In qualifying, Hill put the new Lotus 49 on pole position by half a second over the rest of the field, in a car that had barely existed a few weeks earlier. On race day, Hill shot into the lead and started pulling away. For the first 10 laps, it looked like the Lotus 49 would deliver the perfect debut. Then a gear in the camshaft drive broke and Hill's engine stopped. That left Clark. He had started further back on the grid after struggling with the car during practice, but once the race settled in, Clark carved his way through the field with the kind of calm, ruthless precision that made him the most feared driver on any grid he entered. He took the lead and never gave it back. The Cosworth DFV won a Formula One Grand Prix on its very first outing. No testing program, no season of development, first race, first win. Clark went on to win 3 more Grands Prix that season at Silverstone, Watkins Glen, and Mexico City. The Lotus 49 was the fastest car in the world, and everyone in the paddock knew it. Number 6. The season that should have been a coronation. Jim Clark won 4 of the 11 races in 1967 and set fastest lap after fastest lap. On raw pace, nobody came close. The Lotus 49 was the dominant car. And yet Clark finished the season 3rd in the championship, 10 points behind Denny Hulme in a Brabham. Hulme's car was slower on every circuit, but his Repco engine finished race after race, while the Lotus kept finding new ways to break down. The reason was the same thing that haunted every Colin Chapman design: reliability. Chapman built his cars on the absolute edge of what the engineering could withstand. If everything worked, they were untouchable. When something broke, and something always broke, the car retired. Hill's camshaft gear at Zandvoort was just the beginning. Suspension failures, gearbox problems, the odd engine issue. The Lotus 49 was devastatingly fast and frustratingly fragile. Clark dragged results out of it through sheer talent, but the car let him down too many times for the mathematics of the championship to work in his favour. Still, the message to the rest of Formula One was unmistakable. The DFV was the engine to have. And by the end of 1967, Ford was about to make it available to everyone. Number 5. The engine Ford gave away. The original deal between Ford, Cosworth and Lotus was exclusive. Only Lotus could run the DFV. Ford had paid for it, and Chapman expected to keep the advantage to himself. Walter Hayes had a different view. He could see that the DFV was so far ahead of everything else that Lotus would simply walk the championship every year. That might sound good for Ford, but Hayes understood something subtler. If Lotus only won because nobody else had the engine, the victory would look hollow. Worse, it would give Ford a reputation as a company that hoarded its advantage rather than competing openly. At the end of 1967, Hayes and Kopp sat Chapman down and explained that the DFV would be sold to any team that wanted one. Chapman was furious, but the decision was final. From 1968, any team in Formula One could buy the most competitive engine on the grid for £7,500. In today's money, that is roughly the price of a well-specified family car. The impact was seismic. Suddenly, a team operating out of a garage in Surrey could bolt the same engine into their car that Lotus and McLaren were running. You did not need Ferrari's budget or the BRM factory. You needed a monocoque, a Hewland gearbox, a Cosworth DFV, and someone brave enough to drive it. The first customer was Ken Tyrrell's Matra International team, with a young Jackie Stewart behind the wheel. Stewart won the World Championship in 1969. Every single race that season was won by a car powered by a Cosworth DFV. Ford had democratized Formula One. Number 4. The day the music stopped. On the 1st of January 1968, Jim Clark won the South African Grand Prix. It was his 25th Grand Prix victory, breaking Juan Manuel Fangio's all-time record. Clark was leading the 1968 World Championship. He was 32 years old and at the peak of his powers. 3 months later, on the 7th of April, Clark travelled to the Hockenheim Ring in Germany for a Formula 2 race. It was not a World Championship event. It was a support race during a gap in the Formula One calendar, the kind of event that top drivers routinely entered to stay sharp and honour contractual obligations with tyre suppliers. The conditions at Hockenheim that day were cold and wet. Visibility was dreadful, with spray hanging over the long straights that cut through the forest surrounding the circuit. Clark's Lotus 48, the team's Formula 2 car in its new gold leaf livery, had been suffering from engine problems all weekend. The fuel metering unit drive belts kept breaking in the freezing temperatures. The team could not find the fault. Clark had qualified only 7th, well off the pace, struggling with the misfiring engine and tyres that were not suited to the conditions. On the 5th lap, Clark's car left the circuit on a long, fast curve through the forest. At over 150 miles per hour, the Lotus struck the trees lining the track. There were no barriers, no runoff, just trees. Jim Clark was killed instantly. The cause was never definitively established. Investigators concluded it was most likely a deflating rear tyre. Some in the paddock suspected the engine had cut out mid-corner, unsettling the car at a speed where recovery was impossible. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The greatest driver of his generation, and quite possibly the greatest who ever lived, was gone. Colin Chapman said he had lost his best friend. Graham Hill, who heard the news at the circuit, was devastated. Jackie Stewart, Clark's closest rival and confidant, would later say that something fundamental changed in Formula One that afternoon. The sport lost not just a champion, but a kind of innocence. I go through the comments on every video and I see a lot of people asking great questions. So if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Let us get into the rest of this story. Number 3. The man who carried the torch. With Clark gone, the weight of Team Lotus fell entirely on Graham Hill's shoulders. Hill was 39 years old, a former world champion himself, but he had always existed in Clark's shadow at Lotus. Clark was the natural, the intuitive genius behind the wheel. Hill was the grafter, the man who won through determination and sheer bloody-mindedness. In 1968, Hill pulled a grieving team together and went racing. The gold leaf Lotus 49B, in its striking red and gold livery that replaced the traditional British racing green, became one of the most recognisable cars in the sport. That livery, incidentally, was another revolution. Gold Leaf was a tobacco brand, and the Gold Leaf Lotus made Team Lotus the first works team to abandon national racing colours and run in the colours of a commercial sponsor instead. Chapman, always searching for funding, had changed the look of the sport forever. Hill won 3 Grand Prix that season at Spain, Monaco and Mexico. At Monaco, he drove one of the finest races of his career, threading the Lotus through the barriers of Monte Carlo with the kind of controlled aggression that made him a 5-time winner of that event. He held off Jackie Stewart in a fierce championship battle and took his second World Championship title, dedicating it to the memory of Jim Clark. It remains one of the most emotional title wins in the history of the sport. And through it all, the Cosworth DFV kept winning. It did not matter that Clark was gone. The engine carried on, powering Hill, Stewart, and a growing list of drivers and teams to victory after victory. The DFV was bigger than any one person. Number 2, the decade that belonged to one engine. What the Cosworth DFV did through the 1970s is almost impossible to exaggerate. Every single World Championship from 1968 through 1974, both drivers' and constructors' titles, was won by a car with a DFV in the back. Jackie Stewart won 3 of those titles. Jochen Rindt won a championship posthumously in 1970 after being killed at Monza, still powered by a DFV in a Lotus 72. Emerson Fittipaldi became the youngest world champion the sport had ever seen in 1972 with a DFV. The list goes on. By the mid-70s, there were races where more than 3/4 of the entire grid was running the same British V8. Ferrari was the most prominent team that refused to buy one, building its own flat 12-cylinder engine. BRM persisted with its own V12 for a while. Matra ran a French V12 of its own design. Alfa Romeo and later Renault developed their own power units, but the overwhelming majority of teams simply bought a DFV off the shelf and went racing. Then in 1977, Renault arrived with a turbocharged engine and the game started to change. The turbo cars were initially unreliable and laggy, terrible on tight circuits and prone to spectacular failures. The nimble, responsive DFV-powered cars continued to win, especially once ground effect aerodynamics arrived and turned the lightweight British chassis into downforce-generating machines that stuck to the track like nothing before them. The DFV found new life. Mario Andretti won the 1978 title with Lotus. Alan Jones took it for Williams in 1980. Nelson Piquet won in 1981 with Brabham. Keke Rosberg won in 1982, also with Williams, all with the DFV. And across the Atlantic, a turbocharged derivative of the engine called the DFX was doing something even more extraordinary. Reduced to 2.65 litres and fitted with forced induction for American open-wheel racing, the DFX won 10 consecutive Indianapolis 500 races between 1978 and 1987, 10 in a row. It ended the decades-long reign of the Offenhauser engine that had been synonymous with Indianapolis racing for a generation. No engine in the history of American open-wheel racing had ever dominated like that before, and none has done it since. Number 1, 155. By 1983, the turbo revolution was in full swing. Ferrari had won, Renault had won, BMW was powering Brabham to race wins. Even the British constructors who had relied on the DFV for years were negotiating their own turbo deals. McLaren was talking to TAG and Porsche. Williams was courting Honda. The writing was on the wall. Cosworth made one last effort. They developed the DFY, a thorough redesign of the original engine with revised cylinder heads, a shorter stroke, and a new bore. It produced around 520 brake horsepower at 11,000 revolutions per minute, a massive leap from the original 408. But even that was not enough to fight engines with triple or quadruple the atmospheric pressure being forced into their cylinders. Only one team truly committed to the DFY. Ken Tyrrell, the man who had been the first customer to buy a DFV back in 1968, ordered 10 of the final units. Tyrrell had run Cosworth Power for every single race of his Formula One career, from Jackie Stewart's first win with Matra in 1968 all the way through to 1983. He was not about to switch now. On the 5th of June 1983, the Formula One circus rolled into the streets of Detroit, Michigan. The tight, twisty street circuit was the kind of track where the DFV had always thrived, where throttle response and driver precision mattered more than raw power. And fittingly, the circuit sat in the shadow of Ford's global headquarters. The DFY was well suited to street circuits. Its throttle response was instant, pinpoint sharp compared to the laggy turbo engines that suffered on their tight technical tracks. And Detroit was as tight and technical as they came. A young Italian driver named Michele Alboreto took the wheel of the Tyrrell and drove the race of his life. He threaded the car through the concrete walls of the Detroit street circuit, held off the turbo cars, and crossed the finish line first. It was the 155th victory for the Cosworth DFV in Formula One, and it was the last, Tyrrell's final win. Ford's final moment of glory in the naturally aspirated era, and the closing chapter of an engine that had been born from a £100,000 deal in a converted workshop in Northampton 16 years and 1 day earlier. Approximately 380 DFV engines were built across the engine's lifetime. Those 12 drivers' titles were shared between 9 different men, and the 10 constructors' crowns went to 5 different teams. They won at Le Mans, they won at Indianapolis, they won on street circuits and permanent tracks, in the rain and the sun, in the hands of legends and journeymen and weekend privateers who just wanted to go Grand Prix racing. The engine outlived Jim Clark by 15 years. It outlived the entire era of national racing colours. It outlived Colin Chapman himself, who died of a heart attack in 1982 at the age of 54. It outlived the team structures, the regulations, and the philosophy of Formula One that existed when Keith Duckworth first put pencil to paper in that small Northampton workshop. In 1985, Martin Brundle entered a Formula One weekend at the Austrian Grand Prix with a DFV variant in the back of his Tyrrell. It was the last time the engine appeared on a Formula One grid. After that, the DFV moved on to Formula 3000, where it powered a new generation of young drivers until the early 1990s, when Formula One created a special championship for naturally aspirated cars during the 1987 season. The final years of the turbo transition, they named the Drivers' Award the Jim Clark Trophy, and the constructors' equivalent was called the Colin Chapman Trophy. The 2 men who gave the DFV its first victory at Zandvoort in 1967 had their names permanently written into the sport they changed forever. The Lotus 49 was the car that started it all. A machine built around an engine so good that it made the car itself almost secondary. Colin Chapman understood that before anyone else. Jim Clark proved it on the racetrack, and the DFV carried the torch long after both of them were gone. If you found this video fun, consider subscribing, and we will see you in the next one.